The Miami Dolphins are getting ready for their first set of joint practices this preseason with the Atlanta Falcons. And here's some of the matchups that I'm going to be looking forward to the most here today on Locked On Dolphins.
You are Locked On Dolphins, your daily Miami Dolphins podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
All right, Miami, welcome to another episode of Locked On Dolphins. It is your team every day here on the Locked On Network. I'm your host, Kyle Krabs, lifelong Miami Dolphins fan, host of Locked On Dolphins, co-host of Locked On NFL Scouting. You can find our shows on YouTube or wherever you listen to your favorite podcasts. Tip of the cap to our everydayers, because it is your team every day. We don't just say it, we live it here on the Locked On Network. Today's episode of Locked On Dolphins is brought to you by FanDuel. The sports stop sporting in the dead heat of summer, but FanDuel keeps the action going whenever you want. They are offering customers a boost or bonus daily. There's something for everyone every day all summer long. Visit FanDuel.com to get started. If you're watching on YouTube, you may notice I'm home. I spent the last 12 days down in South Florida for Miami Dolphins training camp, and it was an excellent experience as far as learning about the players on this team, learning about the coaching staff, learning about the evolution of the ideology and how they are trying to problem solve the limitations that were in place last year that prevented this team from going where they want to go. And I want to extend a very heartfelt thank you to the Dolphins organization and Nolan, the entire communication staff, for their hospitality. Wonderful experience. And if you as a fan ever have a chance to go down for one of the public practices that is open, I strongly encourage you to do so. That said, the team is practicing today. Mike McDaniel just spoke to the media, but it's not the joint practice. Joint practices start tomorrow. We did get some exciting news this morning from Mike McDaniel and then from Nat Moore and Zach Thomas, announcing that the Dolphins have a new Ring of Honor member in Tim Bowens. We'll talk about that a little bit at the end of the show, but given kind of the dead period in limbo between they were off yesterday, I'm not at practice today, we're going into the practice against the Falcons. I kind of wanted to set the stage for these joint practices between Miami and Atlanta because I am co-host of Locked On NFL Scouting. I kind of have a baseline understanding of all the teams across the league as part of that show, which is dedicated to team building and roster management. And we've done the evaluations on all the teams this summer and the players that they have. So having seen the Dolphins for the last 2 weeks and knowing what the Falcons have on their roster, I kind of have a certain level of expectation for performances in certain position rooms. I thought this would be a great time to kind of set the stage for that as we get ready for 2 days of reports, then a preseason game between the Falcons and the Dolphins. So when the Dolphins have the football, this will be the biggest test is Grady Jarrett up front. There's a lot of youth. There's some first step explosiveness on the edge. They got a lot of young guys on this defensive line that Raheem Morris is going to be working with. There's a lot of athleticism. But the guy is really Grady Jarrett as far as what opportunities do you see for Aaron Brewer and Robert Jones and Lee Meichenberg and Jack Driscoll, all those names that you kind of associate right now. You know, Isaiah Wynn is off doing whatever preparations Isaiah Wynn needs to do to be ready for whenever he's going to be ready to play football this season. So he's not a part of this puzzle for the Dolphins right now. What does that look like? Grady Jarrett's been an impactful interior defensive lineman for quite some time. How does Robert Jones handle his quickness? Can Aaron Brewer really anchor if he gets him in power situations? Or does Aaron Brewer get David Onyemata? I think that'd be a great measure for him. I think Brewer would be very well equipped to handle the likes of like Taquan Graham as a non-explosive nose tackle type player. But I want to know who's going up against number 97 for Atlanta. This is a great affirmation opportunity in my mind for the Dolphins with their offensive tackles. I think the tackle group's pretty good. Now, they've also been blocking the Dolphins edge guys without Jalen Phillips and Bradley Chubb being a piece of the puzzle. It's been headlined by Chop Robinson, Muhammad Kamara, Quentin Bell's been a standout. He get the orange jersey today at practice for the Monday practice, which is very, very well deserved. He had an awesome series of practices when I was down there. And that's a really cool subplot for Miami. And perhaps, we'll touch on that when we get in Miami defense versus Atlanta's offense. But Quentin Bell is a good litmus test for him as well. But I think the tackles going against a group of a rookie and Brandon Dorless and Zach Harrison, those are young guys that were mid-round draft picks. And Arnold Ebiketie hasn't taken a step for Atlanta despite being a superbly physically gifted. I would guess Ebiketie's listed as a second string guy. If he's going against Patrick Paul, I would guess Patrick Paul handles him better than he handled Chop Robinson based on what I saw in Chop and what I've studied of Ebiketie on tape. So I expect a good practice for Patrick Paul. And I think Patrick Paul has outperformed Kendall Lamb through the first 2 weeks. So it's a nice affirmation opportunity against this edge group to not only get an affirmation that the Dolphins edge group is going to be fine in the short term while guys are working their way back, but also a nice affirmation that the Dolphins tackle group has some stability to it with a 5 deep. That's Tehran, whatever we see of Tehran, Kendall Lamb, Austin Jackson, Patrick Paul, and Keon Smith. I would think that group has success against the entirety of this edge group for the Falcons. Now, I think Miami's biggest advantage comes with the wide receiver. If Tyreek and Jalen practice together jointly, I know that there's load management that's going on with all these Dolphins players, and that's totally fine. You need to be ready to play a little over a month from now. You don't need to be ready to play with all your guys today. So if that means you need to be selective with who's getting what kind of volume right now to ramp it up, great. Do whatever you got to do. But if the Dolphins have 10 and 17 on the field at the same time, AJ Terrell, I would expect whoever's getting that assignment will win their fair share of reps there. But the other corner spot of either Mike Hughes or D. Alford or Clark Phillips, that's a matchup that I really expect big things from either Waddle or Hill, however they choose to do that. And I would expect this stuff will be pretty vanilla. I think you'll have big middle of the field opportunities against the Falcons defense as well, with Caden Ellis and Troy Anderson as the listed starters. Nate Landman may be taking one of those starter spots after he played a lot of volume last year, but I don't think this is like Houston last year, where Houston, you look back on it retroactively, and they had a lot of guys in coverage in the middle of the field between their safeties and Jalen Petrie and Jimmy Ward and their linebacker group. I thought that was a pretty sturdy group against the middle of the field. I think the Dolphins are better equipped to attack the middle of the field against this group and whatever they want to do. And if they're running a lot of stuff to the outside, I think that's them showing they want to take the opportunity to work on some things that maybe they want to get better at. So don't read too much into it, right? But the one-on-one matchups and the physicality of it, I look at the Falcons 2 deep and I look at the Dolphins offensive depth chart, and I think there's really good litmus test opportunities both on the edge where I think you're really good if you're Miami and where you're trying to let the dust settle. And this is a big audition opportunity for your guys on the inside. What about when the Falcons have the ball? There's some talent, a couple of top 10 draft picks and skill players and a really well-established quarterback in Kirk Cousins and a very stable offensive line group. Where are the matchups that I'm most interested in these joint practices? We're going to get into that next year on Locked On Dolphins. Stick with us. Today's episode of Locked On Dolphins is sponsored by BetterHelp. When your schedule is packed with the kids, big work projects, and more, it's easy to let your priorities slip. Even if you know what makes you happy, it's hard to make time for everything. And when you feel like you have no time for yourself, non-negotiables like therapy are more important than ever. If you're thinking of starting therapy, give BetterHelp a try. It's entirely online, designed to be convenient, flexible, and suited to your schedule. Just fill out a brief questionnaire to get matched with a licensed therapist and switch therapists at any time for no additional charge. Never skip therapy day. with BetterHelp. Visit betterhelp.com/lockedon today to get 10% off your first month. That's BetterHelp, HELP.com/lockedon. When the Falcons have the ball, um, it's kind of the inverse. Well, no, kind of the inverse because I look at the interior for Atlanta and second round pick in Matthew Bergeron from the 2023 draft class, Drew Dahlman at center. Who's going to be the interior guy? I want Zach Sealer working on Chris Lindstrom because that's good on good. That's going to get Zach really ready to go. And whoever your other guys are going to be, are you going to go with your odd front looks where you're going to go 3-4 base and you're going to cover up all three of those interior offensive linemen with whether it's Benito Jones on the nose or Tier Tart on the nose, or it's going to be Jonathan Harris, or it's going to be Neville Gallimore, or it's going to be anybody else. Calais Campbell. Those matchups for those guys that are kind of all in that collective pool of competition to make the roster, going against Bergeron and Dahlman, I think is a big opportunity for who can win those, because that's the area of the Falcons offensive line that you look at and you say, hey, if there is kind of an incomplete element of how good they are, it's left guard center. Who can take advantage of that? That's the names that I kind of have soft circled to know who's going to be the opportunistic ones in those matchups. Because on the edge, you have a really good Pro Bowl caliber player in Jake Matthews, and you have a guy who has been a good fit in the system that the Falcons have run, and I would expect there will be a fair amount of carryover with Zach Robinson coming over from the Rams to run a Shanahan tree style offensive line. Although I do think Caleb McGarry is a nice audition for guys that are competing for early reps. Quentin Bell, we talked about earlier, Chop Robinson, who has flashed and had good, healthy battles with Patrick Paul at times. Can I get some reps there? Can I see what that looks like? Or are you just going to leave Emmanuel Agba to go out there and take those reps against Chris Lindstrom? I'd kind of rather have my audition guys going up against Caleb McGarry, even if Jake Matthews is going to get you better, or at least for some of those reps. Get the reps against McGarry because I want to see who can win those. Where if you're going against Jake Matthews, you're probably going to have a higher floor of consistent performance that in a perfect world, you would love to have guys go out there and beat that. But if you're trying to create separation between guys that are competing for snaps, I'd probably rather start that process against Atlanta by having those guys take reps against a guy that I look at productive against moving forward. So that's kind of my thought process as far as why I would want your guys in competition on the edge going against Caleb McGarry. As far as Atlanta's skill group, I think a healthy and in a game situation environment, Miami has ample one-on-one physical matchup opportunities with Jalen Ramsey against Drake London to play physical and really be combative. I think Darnell Mooney as the other primary wide receiver. Kendall Fuller is a matchup there. And then Cater Kohu, if he were to match up with Rondale Moore. It sounds like Cam Smith is practicing today. That's a nice development for Cam Smith. And reps against short area quickness guys and quick twitch guys like Darnell Mooney and Rondale Moore. And then a long guy like Drake London. That's a really good rotate your reps against guys type opportunity for Cam Smith to get a feel for where he's going to be at in this pecking order. Can he challenge Cater Kohu for the third corner spot? Is he definitively behind him? Because that once you're past that, you're into the Saran Neal, Ethan Bonner type territory. And you would obviously want Cam Smith with the investment that's been made in him to slide ahead of those guys, but he's got to go out there and do it. And there's guys that I look at that bring different skill sets that Cam Smith has a big time audition opportunity against. The deeper guys in the depth chart, like Hodge and McLeod, Casey Washington, who's a 6th-round pick this year, if Cam Smith's going against those guys, I expect him to beat those guys, particularly in team settings where you can leverage and it's not just a wide receiver DB one-on-one and there's all this space that you have to defend. Kyle Pitts is probably the most challenging individual matchup, and whether that's the linebackers, we'll see what happens with Jordan Brooks. Mike McDaniel said in the press conferences today, and I want to leave some of this for segment 3 because that's what we're supposed to talk about it. But Jordan Brooks, Mike McDaniel's not concerned, but he's somebody who they've reined back in for the last couple of days because of some kind of bump or bruise or nag that's been bothering him, so that they pulled him in to not let something get worse. But Mike McDaniel said, I'm not concerned about the timeline there. But matching up with Kyle Pitts, can anybody win those reps consistently? Is it Javon Holland? Is it Jordan Brooks if he practices? I don't think David Long would, although David Long in zone coverage, I think, could leverage it fine if you're working middle of the field. Marcus May knows him well from his time in New Orleans. Is that somebody who can maybe kind of attack the way that Pitts attacks the football? All in all, I think this is a team that should be expecting to compete for the NFC South Division Championship this year. So for Miami to get a matchup against a team like that has playoff aspirations and has good top-end talent in a lot of rooms, whether that's Jarrett or whether that's A.J. Terrell or Bijan Robinson with Kirk Cousins and Kyle Pitts and Drake London, or the offensive line, like there's healthy matchups here. My expectation is Miami has the better 3-day sample size between the 2 practices and the preseason game. Now, you never know how a team is going to react or respond when they first get the opportunities to come in and compete. Do you come out flat? You come out overhyped and the other team comes out flat and then it bounces back the next day. There's an unpredictable nature of it. If I were to tell you what I'm hoping happens, I am hoping that this team, with the leaders that have been brought in and the point of emphasis on being really physical and accountability with the players and every opportunity and stacking days, and every coach has the same message for his team in that regard. But this feels like it's a player-driven movement for accountability within the Dolphins locker room this year. I would hope you don't come out flat. It'd be a very disappointing turn of events if the Dolphins practice on Tuesday and the Falcons punch them in the mouth, and then they have to come back on Wednesday and be like, oh, well, we got our lunch money taken. Let's pick ourselves back up by our bootstraps and play like we're capable of, and then play well. If the messaging that's internal with this team is hitting home the way that it's supposed to, with the leaders that are in there that we keep hearing about, they'll strike hard and they'll strike first on Tuesday. Now, a couple other injury date updates coming your way, plus Tim Bowen's going into the Ring of Honor announced this morning. That's coming your way next year on Locked On Dolphins. Stick with us. We all love sports. So when the sports stop sporting the way that we want them to, and there's not playoff hockey and basketball and football and baseball, or however those months all stack up when there's so much happening at once, that's really not where we're at here in the beginning of August. But FanDuel lets the sports go whenever you want them to. All you have to do is open up the app and dream up bets anytime you are in the mood. This summer, FanDuel is hooking all customers up with a boost or bonus daily. There's something for everyone every day, all summer long. So head over to FanDuel.com to start making the most out of your summer with FanDuel, official sports betting partner of Major League Baseball. Congratulations to Tim Bowens, who was arguably the best nose tackle in the history of the Miami Dolphins organization. Tim Bowens played in 157 games for the Miami Dolphins from 1994 to 2004. He was the AP Defensive Rookie of the Year in 1994. He was named to 2 Pro Bowl seasons, once in 1998 and once again in 2002. Finished his career with 22 career sacks, according to Pro Football Reference. And he is, I believe, the 28th member of the Miami Dolphins Ring of Honor. It was announced that he is going to be inducted at the end of October. Was the October 26th game, I believe, which would be your game against the Falcons. Yeah, 2024 Miami Dolphins Ring of Honor inductee, 28th member, halftime of the game on 10/27. Congratulations to Tim Bones. Very cool that Zach Thomas was there to help announce him as the newest member as well. During Mike McDaniel's press conference this morning, he disclosed that Anthony Walker, Jordan Brooks, and Jordan Poyer were all going through injuries, but there was not a great level of concern with any of those 3 players. And I've already seen the tweets. The Dolphins need a new training staff. There's injuries every year. I hate to tell you guys this if you feel that way, but they're playing football. It's a physical sport. Guys get hurt every day. And the way that you put yourself in a best position to win as many games as possible is to try to coordinate your player health for when the season starts. So if guys are bumped up now, and I know that it's not the old school way of doing things, and Don Shula is probably rolling his eyes hearing me say this now, but if a guy's got bumps and bruises and you don't want him to carry it all the way through the season, so you need to sit him for a week, you sit him for a week. I would rather this team, and I know that there's been a lot of injuries the last 2 years at the end of the season, and it has impacted your ability to perform and compete. Have they been a little unlucky in that regard? Sure. Have they also had guys that are in various stages of their careers where they might be a little bit more prone to it? Yes. So load management's important for these guys to try to get them cycled and ready to go. I think it's promising that Mike ultimately says there's not a great deal of concern with any of those players and their outlook as far as being back with the team before too much time passes. So based off the tone of what Mike McDaniel said, you may hear Jordan Brooks and Anthony Walker and Jordan Poyer dealing with injuries. But based off the tone of what Mike McDaniel had to say, if I had to guess, it probably is the next couple weeks. And that's a rough estimation off my part without Mike giving timelines. But usually when he's that kind of passive with a player situation, it's probably something minor that they just don't want to linger. It's the same thing that happened with like Jalen Waddle last season in the preseason, fell on the ball, right? Knocked the wind out of him, whatever happened. He sat out a week and then they ramped him back up and he was good to go. So that's all the happenings for the Dolphins. Tim Bowen's Ring of Honor, a couple of guys banged up that they're protecting. And now you guys are pretty well set for practices with the Falcons and where I think the ultimate litmus test and measuring sticks are for Miami and the guys that are competing for spots. Looking forward, as I'm sure the Dolphins are, to competing against somebody else in the next couple of days, some healthy competition over the next 2 days. You, of course, hope that the number one thing with joint practices is that everybody gets out the other end with no major injuries. So let's hope that that can be the case for both Miami and Atlanta. They can enjoy the competition, enjoy the break on hitting their teammates, and everybody can break no worse for wear for the upcoming season. That's going to do it for us here on this episode of Locked On Dolphins. It is your team every day. I appreciate you guys for checking out the show. Make it a great rest of your day. I'll be back to talk to you all again soon. Go Dolphins.